Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today we have Patrick, and I looked at Patrick's history, and he's been in the game for about 30 something years at this point in time. So he's definitely a seasoned vet for what we're going to be talking about today, which is probably one of my favorite topics. When we're going to dive into a little bit of branding and some other things as far as marketing. But I like to get whoever I'm interviewing on a particular nickname. So today's nickname is going to be an interesting nickname. His nickname is going to be the Know It Owl Boss. So, without further ado, the floor is yours, Patrick. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about you and what would you like to talk about today?
Well, I've been the head of this agency for almost 32 years. It's an interesting migration from entrepreneurship to running a business. That's one of the things I'm interested in exploring. I think it's an under-discussed element for people that start a business and then turn it over, you know, have other people run it. And so I've always really enjoyed just the actual day-to-day operation of the business and just fascinated by that. Um, for about 17 years, I taught marketing at the University of Minnesota in the Knights. I was a visiting associate professor there. And I think that really informed a lot of the cutting edge work that we've done here. We were the first agency in Minnesota to jump on the web in 98. The year Google was founded, we recognized that could be helpful to our clients. So we've always had a real openness to exploring what's on the radar, things like artificial intelligence now. But the big one really was when the internet became useful as a vehicle to advance the cause of our clients. We have a really interesting story with our staff here. The average tenure is over 12 years. Our creative director has been here 22. Our client service director has been here 25. Our head of media relations has been here over 20. Our office manager has been here over 20, and I've been here 32 almost. So we have a real cohesive team that's really efficient because we've worked together at a high level so long. So, um, one of the goals I had when I started the business was to make it a place I wanted to come to work. And I really spent a lot of time thinking about how you do that. And that's another thing I'd be interested in talking about. How do you build an organization that sustains the camaraderie, the connectiveness, people being loyal to it for reasons that go way beyond a paycheck. How do you retain somebody for 2 decades? That kind of thing, I think, is important. I really value the employees here in a unique way, I think. And we've worked with about 400 clients over the years, everything from gigantic ones like Target to very small startups. So we don't really have a scale size of our client base. Anybody that wants to grow, we're interested in working with, basically. That's just a toe dip there.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a lot of different things we can unpack, and I think starting off with the tenure. So you brought up Trevor, who is your creative director. So I want to kind of talk about that. I mean, obviously, holding a creative director for that long period of time, obviously, I would think in that journey, there's probably been some hurdles and some wrinkling out of the irons. But now that you guys are pretty stable, just talk about like how did you kind of create an environment that was that inviting for someone to stay that long?
Trevor's a really interesting story. We call him our Swiss Army knife. He's just willing to do everything and he's good at everything he does. So he's just a real incredible utility player in addition to being a really strong creative director. That role he plays in a traditional sense, and then he leads the creative of the agency. But he's got an interesting background in that he knows how to like take a 64-page brochure and turn it into a 8-page fold out that he concocts the accordion fold for it, and he's back cutting it himself. And he's just a real hands-on. But when we hired him, it was him versus another on paper much more qualified. If you just looked at the two on paper, there was there was no question who was probably the better hire. But I just got this sense that he had a unique ability to be kind of the glue, somebody that everybody would like, everybody would enjoy working with. He didn't have the academic credentials that this other person did, but he was an Eagle Boy Scout. And just something about him, you could really tell he was a good person. I don't hire conventionally. I try to hire for talent, and I just sensed a lot of talent, and that's really been true. But he's got 2 kids and a house, and he started here when he was young, and now he's in his 40s. It's really fun to watch somebody spend their adult life, getting married, having kids, buying a house. And, our agency was very helpful for him in being able to do all that. Um, we have a policy here where we have a high degree of accountability for people, but we don't pester them on hours. If somebody has a doctor's appointment, if there's a meeting or something, to give us a heads up, but we're just not fussy about it. If you want to work at home today because your kids are sick, that's fine, all that stuff. I mean, I think most companies are doing that now, but we've just always had that philosophically. One of our core values is putting others first. And that idea, it kind of goes beyond the idea of service. I didn't want to just say service is our highest. I wanted to put it in a phrase that made it abundantly clear what we really meant by it. And Trevor is kind of uniquely special in that area. He really bends over backwards to get stuff done for somebody. And he's just a really good employee, but he's a great, fun guy to work with. And I think he enjoys it as much here as we enjoy having him.
Very cool. Very cool. So, I mean, that leads me to, I think it's kind of ironic that your other half, her name is Pat as well. So like you have Pat, and you have a CEO Pat, and you have a president Pat. So, and one's been there for 31 years and one's been there for 28 years. So it's kind of like a gray area when someone say, hey, you need to go talk to Pat. So I want you to kind of talk about like, how does that kind of work, being that you guys have been in the same space for over 2 decades, and obviously after hours you're together as well. So how does that chemistry work?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that's another unique thing that's worth talking about. How do you work with a spouse? I met Patricia when I was the head of investor relations for a very large bank holding company. And I left that bank to join an ad agency, and we started getting to know each other better socially after I had left the bank. And so one thing led to another. We got married, had 2 kids, and we've been married for quite a while. But I think the way I started the agency in a bedroom. Our daughter was 2 months old. They say there's never a good time to start an agency, but I picked a royally high wire act time on that. But kind of gave me the motivation to just say this has to work. I'm not going to fail at it, because the stakes are too high. It was helpful in a motivational sense. Not that I really needed it that much, but we have very discrete roles. We're at the top floor of a really cool office tower in downtown Minneapolis that's very narrow. So the base floors are all 20,000 square feet, and our floor is 5,000. It's very narrow and long. It runs the whole length of the building, but it's skinny. And she's at one end and I'm at the other.
Okay.
And we drive in separately. So we have, some sort of structured distance that I think that's actually really helpful, oddly, just little things like that. What I tell people that ask me about it is it's either going to be wonderful or it'll be your biggest nightmare. Mm-hmm. And I think which way it would go.
Yeah.
People just kind of, they relate to that. summary of it, but it's been great for us. Our son works here too. He's in Bozeman. So every once in a while we'll have an email and all three of the names will be Strother. And I kind of think that's maybe one too many Strothers, but
I think it's definitely interesting. I mean, being that you guys been in the same space for such a long period of time, and being effectively and still being married as well, and I think like what you have in your office is kind of like a family unit, right? I think I remember
yeah.
seeing. I mean, your birthday is coming up in roughly about a week, and I remember seeing like an old video, and everyone was around the table, and they were playing like I think it was harmonicas or like plastic flutes or something along those lines. So it was very playful. So I want to kind of talk about that. Do you look at your employees as not only equals, but as family members, possibly even like your children to a certain extent?
I wouldn't go as far as, um, I understand exactly what your question is getting at. I think they recognize that I have really deep appreciation for them on a personal human level as well as what they contribute. I do admire their intellect and their creativity and energy. I love having young people around, and I really respect their
Mhm.
insights just, from what they've experienced in their short lives, which has been pretty challenging, I think, in a lot of fronts. But I think everybody knows we have their back. We've had two people with COVID over the last 3 weeks, and they each had to incubate themselves essentially. And, it was just business as usual, kind of. They showed up on Teams calls when they could and that kind of thing. But it's a very cohesive, functional group. We don't have people that don't like each other. There's no politics. There's no real. We have conflict in creative meetings, but it's healthy and it's expected, and we encourage it really. Like, you should be able to say what you think. And um, I get nervous about the family thing because what I want to do is support them in their relationship to their real family, in whatever way we can. We like to have events where their family is here. We get to meet everybody, but I think it goes a little too far. We have a business to run, and I care about them a lot in that sense. I think there are elements of family, but I think it more of, how do you create a really healthy environment that people feel good about coming to work here and think the work is meaningful.
Mhm. So, I mean, with that, I mean, you brought up Ryan, I mean, who's your son, who's obviously a writer for your company. I want you to kind of talk about like his upbringing, considering that potentially you've been in this business his entire life. What
Mhm.
kind of upbringing did you raise them in the household? Did you raise them to understand entrepreneurism, or did you raise them more so to kind of understand business? And that kind of is a more of a segue to what you talked about earlier about entrepreneurism and business.
Yeah. I think my son through osmosis got the entrepreneurial bug. My daughter too, she has she's a curriculum designer for United Health Group, their subsidiary, and she has a master's degree in curriculum design, but also a fine arts degree, and she has a small business that, where she sells ceramic jewelry and that kind of thing that she makes. My son has done a lot of uh, independent journalism. He's been up to the North Pole to write long copy articles about climate change and things like that. He's done a lot of things on the side that our agency has given him some flexibility to do. Like last summer, he went up again near the North Pole to do survey botany work. Uh, Again, related to climate change, but he was gone for almost 5 weeks. So it was a mini sabbatical kind of thing. But he's going to probably leave our agency and go to graduate school and pursue a full-time career in botany. It's really his first love. But he was an English major. I was an English major. My dad was an English major. My grandfather was an English major. My brother was an English major. So the English major thing hit him hard. It got to be less and less a practical major, I think, but he still did it. And I think it served him well because he became a great writer as a result. And it's given him some tools to make a living at pretty much anything he wants to do because he communicates really effectively. But my daughter will say things like, I could tell based on the Christmas presents how well the agency was doing, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Or,
Yeah.
if I was getting up at 3 or something.
Mm. So, I mean, talking about getting up at 3 o'clock, I mean, obviously you've had a long career of swimming, right? I mean, you swim competitively and you've been doing that for a period of time. How does that play into what you do on your business side?
Well, I mentioned that I taught at the University of Minnesota. When I decided to give that up, I wanted to replace it with something. So I had swam in college, so I thought swimming would be good. It would be good for my health and all that. So I just got in the water, and then I realized, the only thing I know how to do with swimming is compete. And so I joined Masters and then got way too involved in it, like I typically do with most things I get involved in. I started training really hard. I hired a trainer and realized I could compete at a pretty high level as an older person. My body hadn't deteriorated as much as my contemporaries.
Mm.
So it's like who can get slower. So I was still pretty good at sprinting. So yeah, I won a few national championships doing that and had a lot of fun. But I have since recently decided to do something different. I did it for about 11 years and I've decided I'm going to change direction and pick something else, but I haven't decided what it is yet.
Hmm. So, I mean, I think obviously being an entrepreneur, there's always the aspect of the mental versus the physical, and it seems like the physical kind of helps you deal with some of the mental stuff from a day to day. Also, you and your wife, I think it was like back in 2018, you guys did like a Seattle to Portland bike ride, right? So, I want to kind of like talk. Is that something that you facilitate throughout the company as far as being outside? You said that your son was outside. You like to be outside. You like to swim. Is that something that's part of your company culture?
Yeah, I think I do think that most people here, yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but there is a real outdoors sort of mentality. Partly that's Minnesota, because if you don't embrace it, it'll drive you crazy. You'll spend your winters just going from your house to your office or whatever without going outside if you can avoid it. So we do embrace going doing stuff outside. Trevor especially, because he was an Eagle Boy Scout, he takes his kids camping all the time, and they're always doing really kind of fun, adventurous stuff. But most of the young people here do that, and even the middle agers. It's a pretty active sort of mentality, I think.
Mhm. So then obviously you talked about like writing in English, but there's another side to you that's the creative side, and you kind of leaned into music and writing music and playing the guitar. I want you to kind of talk about that. Like, how does that then infuse with you as an entrepreneur today?
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of adulthood, I think. When I was when I was young, I knew that I had just either, I don't know if it was curiosity or what you'd call just a natural interest in trying stuff that, I've never really followed the traditional path on almost anything. I turned 70 in about a week, and I don't really want to retire like it. I just
Mhm.
Like the age is just not influencing it. But I recognized when I was, especially on the playground growing up, that I was creative and I really enjoyed making stuff up, making games up, just inventing stuff. And so when I um, was trying to decide what to do with my life, I had majored in English. And then I thought, well, I never took a business course, so maybe an MBA would be helpful. While I was getting the MBA, I thought, well, the reason I didn't take any business is because I didn't think there was any creative part to it. So I wasn't interested in it. I originally was a music major and shifted to English. But after the MBA, I even applied to law school, and I just thought, I wasn't able to sleep, and like 2 days before classes started, I rescinded my application, my admittance, and decided not to do it. And the reason was I didn't think I could ever pursue any creative realm with it that I could think of. So that, looking back on it, um, I migrated towards majors that were more conducive to expressing my creativity without realizing it. I didn't do it intentionally. I have to look back on it to recognize it, that I've always, I don't know if it's that I value it so much, or that I hate to say I'm good at something. You know, I don't have that sort of ego really, but I think, when I'm with my brothers or something, I'm just a lot more likely to say something that they would never say in a million years. It's just, and I don't know if it came from my mom's side of the family or what, but I just, my daughter's very similar. She's just really creative like that. So I think that's why I'm so content in continuing in this role, is because it's such a great creative outlet. When I see my friends that are retired and that kind of thing, it doesn't appeal to me yet.
Mm.
It just, I don't know if it means I'm not ready, or that I need to really have something that can allow me to express that my creative um, side on a regular basis without having, to struggle to invent it.
Well, I think, I mean, creative being a key word and is one of your values that you deliver. So I want you to kind of talk about like your values. I mean, you have knowledge, you have creativity, you have putting others first, nimble, and I think the last one was mentoring. So I want you to kind of talk about why did y'all select those as your particular values? Creativity, I think you kind of explained it, but where do the other ones fall into this equation?
We came up with the values after 9/11, and the reason for that is that was we were about 9 years old at the time, so we were pretty well established. But I realized that there could be these exogenous shocks that come, like we had in '08 with the economy breaking and then COVID. I just thought we need something that's more permanent than strategies. And so I spent some time learning about shared values cultures. I worked with a fellow in Florida that was uh, kind of a thought leader at the time on it. And what we wanted to do was discover what the values of the agency were and document them, but also express those to our clients so they would know what they would get when they worked with us. And we've been pretty relentless, especially the knowledge, creativity, and putting others first. We consider those our core values. We use those to hire. We use them for performance reviews, finding examples of them. We use 360 approaches to get input from other people, so they can share their experience of working with the other person and how they felt they were, you know, put first when the chips were down. So um, the only one we changed, we added nimble. The others have been unchanged for the entire 22 years or so. But we added nimble because we recognized that when the digital became so ingrained in our work, that we thought that that would be a value. That was really the only aspirational value we've had. The others we are already working there, but we put nimble in as more of an aspirational value. Let's see if we can become that.
Mhm.
And, and I think that's really served us well. When the '08 economy hit, we gathered everybody in the conference room and just said, we're going to get through this because of our values. And that was basically the call to arms. It wasn't our strategy that was changing, or we're just going to, work together and get through it together. And I think that was helpful. It gave people some sense of confidence. I also think it's one of the reasons that our tenure has been good, is we've never had a layoff. We didn't lay off anyone through COVID. It was pretty brutal for the we lost 40% of our revenue because in the first year of COVID. But we didn't lay anybody off, and so we got blasted on the bottom line and stuff. But now we got the full team and everything's back to where it was pre-COVID. So we kind of think long term here. We don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I could definitely see the long term, which kind of brings me to your brand and to your nickname and Professor Plum himself, who's happened to sitting on your shoulders right now. I want you to talk about like that day of May 7th, 1992, when you filed for the corporation and Professor Plum was born. Like, what was the concepting behind that and the colors? Because I think that you talk about colors on your blog, you talk about colors a lot. So I want you to kind of talk about the establishment of the color and the brand and the use of the owl.
Yeah, the May 7th date is funny because I went to register the corporation and they asked me for the name of it. And oh yeah, I probably should have thought of that.
Yeah.
So I just made it up on the spot, and it's unchanged. We go by SCG now more than Strother Communications Group. We've always had purple and green as our two primary colors. Uh, I just I like the combination. I thought they were really bold and fresh looking and positive. And I just always thought they went together well. So if you can see Plum has got kind of the green eyes and then the purple body. We didn't actually create Plum visually until our 20th anniversary. I just thought we've been in business long enough that we deserve a mascot. And so I just made up his bio as if he had been born when the agency was born. So I took a little creative license with him. He was homeschooled in Idaho, I believe is what the bio says. But he's fun. I have a pillow of him too, a stuffed version of Plum that I sometimes have on that instead of just the mark. But he's an important part of the agency.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen him on suitcases going to Fargo. I've seen him on beach chairs. So, I mean, obviously, like there's definitely brand recognition, and the fact that you have a mascot pulls into it. So, I want you to kind of talk from like a business standpoint when you're dealing with clients and dealing with their brands. And again, like you're dealing with like multi-million and multi-billion dollar clients. Have you ever gotten into the situation to where you had to guide them into kind of creating a mascot, much like what you have right now?
Yeah, we have done that. We're working with a company right now that we're suggesting a mascot for. One of the things I really like about Plum, I'm not big on PowerPoint, but I will do it just to have a way to kind of organize what I want to say. So there's just some structure to it. I almost don't. I rarely even read what's on any of the pages when I do PowerPoint, but the first thing that they always see on a PowerPoint is Plum. And the reason I do that is to introduce this idea that you need to understand that if you work with us, there's going to be creativity here. and I gauge whether they're smiling or they're like, ooh, uh, this looks a little frivolous, but I try to really explain to them that we're here to outsmart the competition, not outspend them. And Plum is our metaphor for that. We just wanted a really likable image, that nobody could, have any controversy around, or, just a fun, adorable kind of iconic image, and the owl sort of stands for knowledge, so it reinforces our value there. But a lot of organizations have tried mascots that have failed, and so we've noticed some resistance to them, just because to me it's a little bit like, when you go into a company and you see the mission statement framed on the wall, and you kind of know that they don't follow it because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense to you, but yeah, that's kind of the way it is. So I've always treated Plum as a more organic expression of our creativity, and I think everybody appreciates that. But I really like to use it as a way for people to understand who we are a little more quickly.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I think it's definitely interesting because I mean, obviously, I educate people on branding, and I always try to make the comparison of four virtual types of brands, right? There is always a personification brand or a personal brand, a company brand, a service brand, and a product brand. And I always use Apple as that comparison. There's Apple, the company, there's Steve Jobs as the Steve Jobs brand, there's iTunes, and then there's obviously the iPhone. So in your case, do you think like leveraging the icon or leveraging the owl in representation as a personal brand is more long-term lucrative than using an individual person as that brand for that company?
Well, I think there's some separation there. One of the reasons I've been really interested in doing podcasts like yours is because I really want to share the knowledge that we've gained over the years, and say it in a really simple, straightforward way that isn't jargony or um, officious sounding or anything. But collectively as an organization, we've experienced a lot. We did Jesse Ventura's governor inauguration, just some really unusual things. And I think collectively we've gained some really interesting insights on what works and doesn't work. We've spent 20 years trying to understand how to combine research. We use what's called an importance performance query, so we understand what's important and how our client performs against those same criteria. And we're looking back over the dozens and dozens of companies we've done this for, and we realized that it's never once failed when we were allowed to go through it without any breaks in the best practice approach we take. And so we can honestly say that we have a methodology from a brand standpoint that will work if you allow us to take the steps through the entire process. It takes about 12 weeks without skipping a step, and just trust us. And so the business development work that I do is almost entirely oriented around gaining trust so that we get to do that. Because if we can do that front end work, then we're highly confident we'll have a long-term, really productive relationship with a client.
Yeah. So let's just play devil advocate with that. I mean, I think one of your statements in one of your articles on your website was, "Are you easy to do business with?" Right. So considering that as part of the top end of the equation, and considering that you have like a 12-week process, like you and I both know, there's always this one client that's kind of refusing or bucking like your processes and procedures. And again, how have you dealt with that, or have you dealt with that in your past 30 something years?
Yeah, it happens all the time. You know, 30% of the time we're forced to skip steps.
Mhm.
Um, and it always ends the same way, badly. you know, I try to weed that out. I've gotten better at that. Instead of just accepting, okay, we won't do the research, we'll just guess like every other agency.
Mhm.
I just hate doing that. I think one of our strengths is that we take as much guesswork as we possibly can out of this, and get it closer to 70-30, or it's science and art. And we want as much of the science and the knowledge as we possibly can before we push the pedal down on the creative horsepower.
Mhm.
And if we're not allowed to do it the way that we've developed collectively over all these years, we don't have the confidence that our positioning, our platform, our differentiators, all that stuff is what the market is really uh, perceiving at the moment, because we haven't asked them. We're just speculating on our own kind of shared collective knowledge of the category or whatever.
Mhm.
But when we can go out and just objectively poll the market and get insight, I mean, it's classic marketing. Ask the market what they want, what's important, and then, you know, figure out if you're able to operationally deliver on those importance factors. So the promise you're making externally can be kept culturally and
Mhm.
procedurally and operationally and so forth. The stuff is actually really pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. If you just do all of that and you just accept that there's going to be a little bit of a delay before you actually hit the market. I'm really comfortable with a client who says to me, we're at 5 million and we want to get to 20 million as fast as possible. Can you help us? And I'll say, if you let us do it step by step the exact right way, and it depends on the business and so forth, how well known they are and what we need to do to crank up a four bagger or whatever. But we've delivered dozens of clients, doubling, tripling, quadrupling software business, going from 3 to 25 million, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But we cannot ever do that if we don't do the front end work properly, ever. Like, we've never had a successful relationship where we didn't do the front end work.
Mhm.
I mean, we've had, long-term relationships where we're just kind of rolling out print ads or whatever it is. But when we have a really tight program relationship where we're accountable for a top line, profit margins, that kind of thing, we almost never fail if we can not skip the steps. And you don't want to hire us and then redirect our work. If you do that, please hire a different agency.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, we want to work with you because you need to change something, and if you're forcing us to change our own process that we know has worked many, many times in a row, that's not in either of our best interests. I'm getting a little better at saying no if I sense that they're, you know, going to derail us
Mhm.
and themselves.
So part of that process, I can just tell. I think you guys kind of do it seamlessly, and you guys have been doing it for so long. And this comparison I'm going to bring up is I've seen like on your Facebook page at one time. I guess there was multiple donuts, and you guys did a donut tasting. You had like a plate, and around the plate had the numbers for each one of the donuts. And then another time you had a chip tasting. It was like 6 or 7 different bags of chips, and you had different tasting. So that philosophy of tasting multiple different things reminds me of marketing surveying and trying to figure out what people want and how they want it. So do you take that and put that as part of your system as far as the taste testing that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, everything we do has some sort of marketing um, component to it, I think. We like to we have a really wide age range here. It's basically 24 to 70,
Mhm.
and it kind of skews young,
Yeah.
which I really like. And it's just a way to share kind of a common bond, and it's fun. We just hang out on a Thursday afternoon for an hour and eat donuts and have fun. And somebody wins. There's always a winner.
Very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
So,
So I think it's definitely a fascinating. I mean, considering that you've been not only stable but consistent for this period of time. So I want you to kind of look at it from a time traveler's point of view, from a third person aspect. And on your time frame, let's say it's 31 years until now. Is there anything on that timeline that you would like to go back to and talk to your younger self about to help change or adapt to make things a little bit easier in the long run if you would be able to change it?
um, you know, I had very strong feelings about what I wanted when I started. Um, I left a really good job to start the agency. I was on a risk curve that was very, very high. But I thought if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And um, so, so in some ways, I'm going to answer your question in the opposite way. I actually give myself a lot of credit for doing it. I think it's one of the reasons that I'm uninterested in retiring. I had lunch with a bunch of my friends about 15 years ago. I remember this very distinctly. It's guys I had worked with early in my career and stuff. And they were all just talking about how they couldn't wait to retire. That was the entire dominant theme of this lunch. We're in our 50s or whatever. And I just remember leaving thinking, wow, I don't have any of those feelings or thoughts ever. And I think to answer the reverse of your question, the best thing I did was have this vision that I wanted to create a company that I wanted to come in and work at, that compelled me every day for whatever reason, and and then that would be the experience of everyone that worked here. Um, I've never really deviated from that. The other thing that we did, I think, culturally that has allowed us to be in business for 3 decades is we have a really strong belief that everything we do should be in the client's best interest. And that includes working with other agencies that they work with, um, recommending things that are less lucrative to us. We do that all the time. The one mistake that I think I did make was I got too involved in event marketing. We were one of the biggest event marketing agencies in Minnesota for about 8 years. We had the Target account and some others. That's when we did the Jesse Ventura inauguration. It was fun and kind of glamorous, I guess. But we billed $8 million in that business and made exactly zero, and took unbelievable risk. Target is very good at pricing projects. We'd bill them 110 and our expenses would be 110. It was a bad business and we were in it too long. So I guess that does answer your question indirectly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely does, and it kind of. I mean, obviously, you're learning by doing it firsthand, but being that you're highly educated, and I would think that you've been in the game long enough. There's been some books that have probably came across your desk to kind of help you make these decisions. What books do you recall reading that you would like to recommend that helped you become who you are?
Um, my favorite book on branding, one I've been recommending a lot, is called The New Brand World. I've read about 100 books on branding because I was a professor for so long, and that's the one I think really stands out. And, the fellow that wrote it was the head of marketing for Starbucks and Nike. You know, he's just really smart guy, and I agreed with almost every sentiment he had in that book. You know, I didn't read a lot of self-help stuff so much. I've always had a really strong drive to forge my own path. I don't like to get too over prescribed by someone else's thinking. I read a lot. I do read a lot, and I have read a lot of self-help books, but not for the purpose of discovering what I should do as much as just maybe there's an idea in here I can use. Um, I like the Seven Habits book. I think it's seven. Things like that matter a lot to me. I'm a big believer in habits. What you just do over and over. That I think it's probably a fake quote that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I completely disagree with that. That's how I got good at the guitar, is doing the same thing over and over.
Hmm.
You know,
I think that's an interesting philosophy. So you don't think that you do the same thing over and over again with minute, small changes over a period of time to get better?
yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay.
But still scales.
Yeah.
If you every musician plays scales, every classically trained musician plays scales for a reason, just to embed that whatever key you're in, that whether it's muscle memory but just the dexterity from the repetition and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
I'm a big believer in repetition.
So, I mean, with that keyword of repetition, let's say you have an opportunity, and let's say the listener happens to be the 20-year-old version of Trevor, or maybe a little bit younger version of Ryan, your son, or you maybe Rachel, your graphic designer. Let's say that like they're at age 25 at this point in time, and they're listening to you, and they're looking for guidance, and words of wisdom from you. What words of wisdom would you have for them to help them on their journey to be successful?
I think the first rule I would try to insist on is keeping your word. If you say you're going to do something, that's a big deal. And the expectation should be that it will be an extreme event to cause it not to happen. It really bothers me if I said I was going to do something, even if it's trivial and I space it. That's always bothered me a lot. I think it's been a driving force my entire life, is trying to keep my word. I think entrepreneurship, the way I see it anyway, is much more about personal character and integrity and words like that than it is courage or boldness. Or I really think you have to, to survive all the vagaries of running a business, and all the risk you're taking and all the stress and pressure and that kind of thing. I think character is really important. I remember this was in about 2003 or so. We had lost our biggest account, and our second biggest account was shaky. And I remember thinking on my way to the meeting, if I don't win this, that could be the end of the business. And instead of like freaking out and getting overstressed, I thought, well, the best thing is just to stay relaxed and make it happen. So there's a certain amount of theater that you need to come up with at certain occasions where you're not showing the stress. I'm sure every entrepreneur has experienced that,
Yeah.
like this is really important. And if I don't make this happen, I don't know how. I remember after COVID, we hadn't sweated payroll for, decades. And all of a sudden we're sweating payroll again. I'm like, geez, after 28 years, you'd think payroll would be at least covered, so there's all these kind of surprises that it just never stops really. Like once you've started something, you're always an entrepreneur, even if you're running it as a manager of a business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a hell of a segue. And I think you brought it up within the first 5 minutes of this episode. Like, there's a clear difference between an enterprise or a corporation or a full-time business versus the entrepreneur. So I want you to kind of talk about your philosophies between those two.
um I had kind of an interesting early career. I started in a company with 100,000 people. Then I went to a company with 10,000, then a company with 1,000. And then I was in a company of one, me. So it's just progressively smaller and smaller and smaller. But I saw the way these giant corporations were run, and what the executives did at those. And it's almost completely different than what an entrepreneur does. You know, it really is different. I think the average entrepreneur that's running a $5-10 million business is way more skillful and talented than the CEO of an intergalactic enterprise. It's just what I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have to agree with you with that. I mean, to the point to where it's a gift and a curse, right? I mean, I think all entrepreneurs are trying to follow that path to where they can kind of hand things off and delegate it as much as possible to have that more free time to be more of that executive. But I think once you become that executive, you kind of lose some of that gusto, some of that grit that got you there in the first place.
I remember when I was really young, I just started my career and I was in the executive bathroom for some reason. I was handing off a document to the CEO or something. And one of the VPs was in the bathroom and I saw him drinking out of the faucet. He just put his head in the sink and drank from it. And it changed the way I thought about executives my entire life. Just seeing that. I don't know why. I still I still think about that occasionally, like they're just regular people. I had this, I don't know,
Mm, I think it's
kind of,
definitely fascinating.
yeah, I was in awe of them and I shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Yeah. So where does the listener get in contact with you? I mean, obviously you have a website, you have a social media presence. So which is the best way for them to get in contact with
Our website, I think that's where our content platform is that has a lot of, I think, interesting topics on it. That's scgpr.com. I can be reached at pats@scgpr.com. SCGPR just stands for Strother Communications Group PR. We used to be more of a PR firm. Now we're more holistically involved in marketing. But we kept that address. Those are the two best probably ways. Our website, I think, is the best just to get a flavor for how we think. And I think there's valuable content on our resource platform, a lot of different interesting topics.
you? Yeah, your blog is definitely full with elements that people probably don't concept or can't conceive without first reading that article. And I think one of the great articles that I read on your page was just about colors and how to select colors was definitely a great read. In addition to that, something else about your company culture that I think is very, if you're starting a business, if you're an entrepreneur, like looking at your company culture, it definitely kind of gives that full rounded feeling that you were talking about. But even more so, the reason why I had said family earlier was like I think on one page, I think it was your Facebook page, you guys had like a section with the dogs, and I think your wife had the picture of her grand dog, which was Moose, and so like having like the dogs associated to the people, and in today's world, people love animals. Is that something that you came up with, or something that just kind of came up on the table and you just ran with it? How did that come to be?
Yeah, that was just organic. If somebody has an interesting idea in our Monday traffic meeting, we often just pursue it. The the grand dog thing is funny because our daughter had her first child, so it's our grandchild, but the dog bit the baby.
Mm.
And so now we got the dog forever.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it beats the other half that could have happened to the dog. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So going into that, right? I got like a interesting question, and it could be perceived as a scientific or a science fiction question, but if you had an opportunity to spend 24 hours with anyone, and this person could be someone that from 300 years ago, it could be someone that, maybe died 20 years ago, or someone that that's alive now that you haven't met, who would that person be and why?
There's a lot of musicians that I'd like to meet, but the person living now that I'm most interested in meeting would be Warren Buffett.
Mm.
Uh, I think he's one of the few billionaire oligarchs that has sufficient wisdom to not be evil.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
um, and I just have always found him to be really insightful on issues that have always interested me. I think I mentioned that at my one of my jobs was VP of Investor Relations for a big financial institution, which is, as establishment as you can possibly get almost. And so I worked with Wall Street for 7 years doing that, and that's how I kind of got familiar with Warren Buffett. I think very highly of him. I disagree with him on some stuff, but not enough to not be really fascinated. And I would love to go to a Dairy Queen and have a cheeseburger with him.
Totally see it. I mean, I think Warren Buffett, for him, his gift was always being able to retain information. I remember I read an article that as a teenager, he read the almanac, and he used the information from the almanac as a teenager to leverage his investments later on in life from memory. So it's definitely an interesting economy to have that feature in a billionaire for sure.
One of my favorite stories about him is when he played the ukulele to try to serenade a girl in high school. I just thought, what a nerd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would say he's pretty much on the spectrum. I mean, there was another story about him and his wife. His wife was sick and she was throwing up, and she was like, "Get me something." And he went and got her a mesh basket to throw up in, which obviously you would think it's not going to catch anything, but he's not thinking about that. He's thinking about the numbers. He's thinking about like the money, thinking about the investments, and something as simple as getting a bucket. Instead, he got a basket. So
That's pretty funny.
yeah, pretty funny. But I mean, it kind of goes into
Yeah,
Warren is so in tune to what he does. I think his tunnel vision is so extreme that
yeah.
the everyday things, to your point, like the other side of the coin, you could be evil, right? And on his side of the coin, he's just so focused and driven on what he's doing. So I definitely appreciate that answer. So going into closing, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing an opportunity to become the host of Boston Cage. So now the show is yours. You're the host. I'm your guest. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how deep your research was on this interview. Um, it's obvious you take this very seriously and do your due diligence, and I'm just really impressed by that. What has that been your approach to every podcast you've done, or?
Again, because I'm a marketer, and again, it's always the A/B testing, right? So in the early days, I had that general philosophy, but I didn't have access to that in depth of content. So I started to create systems to allow whoever I'm interviewing to give me some more data points, so I can then do some more due diligence. And then once I got into that routine, it became something that's a staple of this show and something that I'm going to continue to keep doing. Because to your point, when you do that much diligence and research, considering that this is the first time you and I have met, I feel like I know you on a personal level. So when I'm having this conversation, it's way more, genuine than just listing off random questions and asking you the same staple questions that you've probably been asked before. And I try to mix it up. And again, you have to get personal to be able to do that.
Yeah, when you knew about Moose, that kind of blew me away. Still not exactly sure how you conjured that up.
Well, it's part of like, again, systems, man. Like when I do my research, it's staged in a certain way to where all your social media channels that are delivered to me in my onboarding form, I'll go through all of them and process them. And then what I really look for is the common denominators that you may not think that I'm going to bring up, and how do I fuse that into business.
Yeah.
But once I found out that your wife was in the business with you, then I started looking at her information. Found out about your kid Ryan, then I started looking at his information. So I'm pulling content from them about you that you may not even know that they have.
Oh. Have you been an entrepreneur your most of your career?
I would say 50% of my career.
Okay.
It really started really diving really hard into it in 2000 when I started my agency. And that's when I started my first corporation. And I've been on the grind literally ever since.
How much of your time does this podcast take? Is it kind of a side thing or?
It's essentially my main lead magnet, right? So in the
Mm.
hemisphere of Boss and Cage, I think our outreach is essentially this podcast, and then we have different services and different features that come along with this podcast, like our online directory. We have a book club, a book directory. We just recently started an internet radio station, so we have multiple different media things that all fit onto this branch. So to answer your question, I think obviously this is my full time everything, but as far as the time I put into the podcast, it's usually scheduled. So I have podcast schedules on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then I have the other 3 days of the weeks to kind of do other things for the company in its whole.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember when I told my brother I was going to start this business, and he said, "Why did you wait so long?"
Mm,
And it was a hard question to answer, but what I said was, I didn't think I had enough knowledge and skill to do it before. And looking back, I think that was right.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you started your current company when you were 39, is it?
Yeah, 38-ish, yeah.
38? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's I usually say it's like that conversion point of right before midlife is when most people that work for corporate America start to figure out I need to kind of create something for my own. And then they like either they jump the room or they get stuck.
Yeah, it actually gains in value as you go because you have so much more control.
Mhm.
I mean, you've got all the the downside risk, but the fact that you get to decide your fate, I think, is really valuable. You know,
Yeah. I think pound for pound, because to your point, you could be 60 years old and you can get faded out just because of your age, even though they're not going to say it's your age, but you're just kind of at that top end to where they don't think they can perceivably get anything else out of you within the next 20 years. So because of that, then they'll just migrate you out and then bring someone else in that's at 20 to at least get 30 years out of that person. So to your point, I mean, it's I guess we're biased because we're entrepreneurs, right? So I think like that's the secret to what we're talking about is if you have not thought about it, at least stop and think about entrepreneurism and how the longevity of it can turn out for you and your family.
yeah, there's key decisions that you make in your life, and um, I know a lot of people that wanted to start a business and they just never did for all kinds of good reasons. It's almost like you have to do it when no matter what the circumstances are, if you're going to do it, because there's never really a perfect time. I suppose right out of college or something, but then you don't have any ability to necessarily. I don't know. I didn't feel like I could have. I mean, I was kind of an entrepreneur as a kid with, lawn mowing and stuff. I liked to, you know, refinish yachts and paint houses, and it's just more lucrative,
Yeah, yeah.
than an hourly wage.
Pound for pound, I think you're definitely right about that. But again, I think we're biased because I mean, even like with our kids, our daughter, she has a lot of entrepreneurism in her. but she does not like the waiting period for the capital to come in. She likes the consistent revenue to come in. And I have to kind of keep explaining to her, it's like, well, think about it from the standpoint of like a snowball effect. Snowballs rolling down a hill eventually get bigger and bigger. At the beginning of it, it's going to be pretty small versus having the same exact snowball over and over again. Like again, you're getting paid, but you're not going to necessarily increase the value of what you're getting paid. You're not going to necessarily increase your wealth. You're working hour to hour to make that money versus having a business that's going to make the money for you. So I think it kind of goes to maturity as well. I think the older you get, the more mature you get, and the more you understand that statement that I just made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
What do you think are the key success factors for entrepreneurs that you know?
I think first and foremost, I think being consistent because again, as an entrepreneur, everyone goes through the ups and downs. Everyone goes through the depression. Everyone goes through the pulling the hair, trying to figure out. Even like to you, to a certain extent, you were successful for so long, and then COVID hit, and then you was like you had to kind of refigure things out for a couple years. It's just be 100% consistent. That's the first thing, and then after that, it's studying the market. It's 100% based upon the marketing strategy. And if you're going to create something, you're better off going balls to the wall as big as you can envision it because again you may not be able to achieve that, but whatever you do achieve is going to be better than if you set a lower bar and then you still don't achieve that lower bar. So aiming for larger and at least getting closer to that larger goal is going to be easier in the long run.
Hmm. I actually took a course in entrepreneurial decision making because
Mm,
I thought it would be helpful. And I did a business plan for it that had some homage to this, but
mm.
not very specifically. But the the business training I had, I found really helpful just on managing the numbers. I've never been, that was zero learning curve. I imagine that could be a challenge for some people that have some math challenges or whatever, but there's a lot of math involved in being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, there's variables. There's a lot of variables, but again, I think for marketers that are entrepreneur, it makes sense because we're always thinking about numbers, thinking about conversions, thinking about A/B testing. All of that kind of just falls into
Yeah,
organic math by default for us.
yeah,
Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on the show today. I think it was definitely insightful. I think you dropped some information for the listener to really think about, to really conceive the concept and the differences between entrepreneurs and actual business owner, because there are clear differences between them. So I definitely appreciate you being on the show today.
yeah. I really appreciate you having me. I also appreciate the care you took for the preparation for it.
Well, the pleasure was all mine, and I look forward to following your company. And obviously, I think Professor Plum, I have a soft spot for him because I mean, I think we share the same brand colors, and I definitely love like your vision of your brand and the fact that it's covering knowledge and creativity 100% through and through.
Okay, that's awesome.
Great.
Appreciate it.
S.A. Grant.